Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment of the show, we're going to discuss Brexit. And there are three main issues that come up when we're discussing it in today's show. And that is, of course, Operation Yellowhammer, the document that has come out about the possible worst case scenario in the situation where there is a no-deal Brexit. The document describes a reasonable worst-case scenario which had been forced out by lawmakers, by British lawmakers, who voted to approve its release. The government obviously wasn't, the government of Boris Johnson, that is, was not in favor of releasing this. There are concerns in that document expressed about public order, medicine supplies, transport efficiency at the border with the EU, the Irish border backstop, as well as food supplies. Another issue about Brexit is obviously also that opposition MPs are now demanding that Parliament be recalled after a Scottish court ruled that its 5-week prorogation period was unlawful. However, a high court in Belfast has dismissed claims that a no-deal Brexit and the imposition of the hard border there would damage the Northern Ireland peace process. This follows as well the Supreme Court, or the High Court, in London, which had concluded that Johnson's advice to the Queen to prorogue Parliament was lawful. That's quite a confusing mix right there, which we will get to with our guests. And thirdly, speculation is mounting that the British government could now impose direct rule in Northern Ireland. What does that mean as well? Let's try and get to as many of those topics as we can with our panelists who are joining us right now. We're joined by Roslyn Fuller, who is the director of Solonian Democracy Institute. She's also the author of several books on democracy, and she's joining us now from Dublin. We're also joined by David Jeffery, who is a lecturer in British politics at the University of Liverpool. He's joining us now from Liverpool. David and Roslyn, thank you both for your time. Roslyn, I'd like to start with you and go right into this issue of the backstop and that meeting that Johnson had with the Irish leader. What do you think will occur when it comes to Brexit at the border there, and what kind of consequences will that have for both sides, both Northern Ireland and Ireland?
Yes, well, for the past long while, we've been hearing from our government that there wouldn't be any border checks, that was absolutely off the table. And only in the last couple of days have they begun to change their tune on that. And they have now said that there will likely be checks, but that these would be of a temporary nature while they try to sort out the issue in the longer term. And they've also been saying that these checks would not occur at the border, but that they would occur in some other location or locations away from what is actually the geographical border. So that's something that's kind of quite suddenly changed in the discourse here. The government ministers have been saying that this is necessary to secure Ireland's position in the single market, and that's why they feel obliged to institute these checks.
You know, David, for a lot of us on the outside, this issue of the backstop and how the border there between Northern Ireland and Ireland works, it baffles the mind, but certainly it's a unique situation overall that was reached that brought peace to that region. Do you think that sort of peace is at risk in some way if there is a no-deal Brexit and a hard border of some sort?
There's certainly a risk that the peace process and peace, especially along the border, will be threatened if there are border checks for a range of reasons, but especially because they present an easy target for dissident or terrorist groups on both sides to attack. But also not just from a kind of security point, but also if a hard border does go up and people find their livelihoods are affected, unemployment increases, people feel like they've got less economic clout. Studies show that drives people to more extreme positions politically, ideologically. So there is a danger there, but it's important to not be too prescriptive about that.
Okay, so, Roslyn, one of the other things that comes up when we're talking about the issue with Ireland and Northern Ireland is just that going forward, what does this mean for the people on both sides? Because, again, as I'd put to David as well, there's a unique situation in place there at that border with Ireland remaining in the single market and the UK leaving the single market. I imagine, the likes of Johnson and others would say, listen, there's really no other way to get around this except to have those sorts of checks in place. And Johnson keeps saying that we'll come to a solution, we'll come to a solution, we'll come to a solution. That's what he said, standing beside the Irish leader. But I can't really imagine that there is any other solution, is there?
Yeah, well, we've been living with this situation for about 20 years now, where the situation has kind of been diffused by the fact that this is all part of the European Union now. And that made the entire decision about whether what we call the North down here, Northern Ireland, should belong to the United Kingdom or whether it should belong to the Republic of Ireland. It just kind of diffused that situation and made it seem less relevant. Now, very, very suddenly, we've been confronted with this issue where when there's going to be a hard border, it now seems suddenly much more part of the United Kingdom, like the optics of it seem much more to belong part of the United Kingdom. That's something that's brought home a lot more than it was in the past little while. And of course, reunification has become a live topic in the Republic of Ireland, where I live again, after being really something that was really, really put on the back burner for a long time. It's something that's been discussed again, although it's a very difficult situation because the most recent poll I've seen, opinion was still split about 50-50 on whether to remain part of the United Kingdom or to join the Republic of Ireland in reunification. And there's a lot of issues surrounding that as well, economic issues. There's issues for people in the Republic of Ireland who, of course, don't want very, very unhappy unionists to be here in Ireland, not happy to be part of Ireland. So, that whole situation with paramilitary activity directed against being part of the United Kingdom actually has a potential to turn the other way and be directed against wanting to be part of the Republic of Ireland.
Okay, so I'll give you the final word, David, about this topic, specifically about the backstop. What do you think will happen when it comes to the backstop issue, realistically speaking? Because to add to all of this, the confusing part that I've always found, at least, is the DUP and its insistence that a hard border is, it sort of has a confusing stance overall, at least from looking at it from the outside in, which seems to be at odds with what many people in that region would want. Will that throw a wrench into any solution to this?
Well, the thing about the DUP is that they want Northern Ireland to remain a full part of the United Kingdom, much more than they want Brexit. So if the only deal that the United Kingdom government can get involves breaking away Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom, they would presumably veto it. And whether that would actually come about depends on whether the UK has an election, because it used to be the case that the DUP provided the Conservative Party with a majority in the House of Commons, but now Boris Johnson has withdrew the whip from a number of Conservative MPs. The DUP don't have that power anymore. So yes, the DUP do want Brexit, but they want to remain within the UK much more than they want Brexit.
All right, thank you to David and Roslyn for their time. Let me add now two new voices to this conversation to take this discussion forward. We're joined now by Paul Bromley, who is a UK political analyst and university lecturer. He's joining us now from Sussex in the UK. And we're also joined by Jason Reid, who is a political analyst, freelance commentator, and deputy editor of the opinion website 1828. He's joining us now from London. Jason and Paul, thank you both for your time this morning. Paul, I'd like to start with you. When we're talking about these court rulings that have come out, I find it a bit confusing and mazed, so maybe you can clarify this for the rest of us on the outside. A Scottish court has said that the 5-week closure, i.e. prorogation, was unlawful. Then we've had this court in Belfast dismissing claims that a no-deal Brexit and the imposition of the hard border would damage Northern Ireland peace. But at the same time, earlier on, a high court in London had said the prorogation was lawful. This paints a bit of a confusing picture when it comes to the laws of the land. What do you make of that?
Well, if you're confused, imagine how most people in the UK feel, because it's equally confusing for everyone, all of us here, trying to work out where the law stands. The slight difficulty is that the United Kingdom has different legal jurisdictions. So although the government is the United Kingdom government, the law as it applies sometimes refers to just England and Wales. There is a separate legal and judicial system in Scotland and a separate one in Northern Ireland. So these three cases have been brought in the three different jurisdictions within the United Kingdom, one in England and Wales, one in Scotland, and one in Northern Ireland. And because they are effectively giving different rulings, it now has to go to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land, for a judgment next week. So they will take into account everything the judges in England and Wales have said, everything the judges in Scotland have said, and everything the judges in Northern Ireland have said, and come to a settled view as to whether the prorogation, the suspension of Parliament, is lawful. And we don't expect that to happen until the end of next week. Meanwhile, the clock is still ticking down towards the 31st of October deadline for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union.
Jason, I'm just going to ask you directly, do you think prorogation was law? Was it within Johnson's right to call for the suspension of Parliament?
I do, and I think that the Supreme Court will find that the prorogation was entirely lawful next week. I think a lot of what's happening is that the people who brought this case to court in the first place are responding to something that's not actually happening. They're responding to a different type of prorogation, which isn't really possible, something that was mulled during the leadership contest, which is the idea of just sending MPs home and forcing through a hard Brexit against their will. That's not what's happening here. The government's called the Queen's speech to present its new domestic agenda to Parliament, which is something that all new governments do. There's nothing groundbreaking about that at all. We are currently in the longest parliamentary session, I think, since the English Civil War. So we are due a Queen's speech. And that's why Parliament has been prorogued.
As you know, Jason, though, the concern, in part at least, from what I've read, is that the Queen was lied to. That's what some people have said, to convince her to prorogue Parliament. Do you think that's true?
Well, that's the allegation, but I think it's extremely unlikely that that's the case. A lot of people on the Remain side, particularly in Parliament, obviously believe that to be the case, and that's why they passed that motion last week to try to force Number 10 staff to give up a lot of their private communications. So they thought they could prove that there's some kind of cunning plan going on behind the scenes. So this is all part of a broader plan to force through a no-deal Brexit while pretending to try to find a deal with the EU. I think that's extremely unlikely that that's the case.
Okay, let's talk about a no-deal Brexit then, Paul, because, you know, as much as many people say that Boris Johnson may possibly be okay with a no-deal Brexit, I mean, he's said that that possibility certainly exists come October 31st if there isn't an agreement in place amongst MPs in Parliament at that time. We also then have now the Operation Yellowhammer document, and as you well know, it's quite fatalistic in some regards vis-a-vis what would occur at the border and food supplies, medicine, etc. Why would Johnson want that? I mean, I imagine that we should take him on his word when he says he does want a deal.
I think he says he does want a deal in order to keep that option going. But I think having seen the way his predecessor, Theresa May, tried and negotiated a deal with the European Union and then tried and failed 3 times to get it through the House of Commons, he does not want to go through that same process again, which ultimately led to Theresa May having to stand down as Conservative leader and Prime Minister. So although he says that he is still pursuing the option of a deal and negotiations with the European Union, he has nailed his colours very firmly to the mast, both in the leadership election, which brought him the premiership, and since, that he wants the UK to leave on October the 31st in 48 days' time. So the Operation Yellowhammer, this worst-case scenario, as the government sees it, planning, was something that all governments do. It was a sort of sensible opportunity. It's what most businesses do. You look at a what-if scenario. What if this happened? What if that happened? So yes, there were suggestions in that document about food shortages, medicine shortages, travel chaos initially as well. That, I think, would be an acceptable short-term pain for Boris Johnson if the long-term gain was that the UK did leave the European Union, as the people of the United Kingdom expressed in the referendum, which is now well over 3 years ago.
But do you think, Paul, that the Britons would stand by even through that short-term pain? Because I imagine that, you know, this process has extended so much anyways, hasn't it, when it comes to Brexit fatigue. Do you think anyone is really patient enough to go through that sort of pain, even for the short term?
I think patience is wearing very thin on all sides. Those who voted Remain still see the arguments and are still trying to renew their campaign with the talk of a second referendum. Those who voted to leave want the UK to leave, whatever. So although there's lots of talk that once this has happened, the divide in British politics and the divide in British society will be healed, I very much doubt there is the case. This issue runs so deep through so many aspects of British society that even leaving the European Union as planned on October the 31st, even with some short-term pain that would inevitably arise, that will not satisfy some people. The diehards will continue to campaign and continue to raise their points. We've already seen MPs protesting against the prorogation of Parliament, turning up saying they want to sit. So I don't think anything is going to actually solve the issue fundamentally and unite the country again.
All right, we'll have to leave this as a final word, gentlemen. I know we've just tipped off the iceberg, but certainly we'll be watching this issue of Brexit very closely in the coming days, months, even possibly if this does get an extension again going forward, although obviously Prime Minister Johnson is against that. I'll thank Paul and Jason for their time today, this morning, speaking to us, both of them from the UK. Viewers, as we've spoken about three main things here. Operation Yellowhammer, that document, which speaks about a worst case scenario, to be fair. However, it doesn't paint a pretty picture for what may occur in case there is a no-deal Brexit from the European Union on the part of the UK. Then there's those cases, the three cases, Belfast, Scotland, and the High Court in London, and three seemingly different rulings. So how does one come to a conclusion with that? Obviously, as we know, a case has been filed at the Supreme Court of the UK to decide once and for all if the prorogation was lawful, what happens when it comes to the backstop, the Irish backstop, that is. And then there's speculation about the UK then mounting direct rule in Northern Ireland. This would obviously be a sensitive time to do so. And it would obviously the optics would not be good. So the government probably realizes that and doesn't want to really get involved to that extent, especially when it comes to such a sensitive region in the country and, of course, in that region, i.e. the European Union as well. We'll keep a close eye on that, as I said. I'll be back, though, with my next segment after this break. Stay tuned.